You're listening to Making the Cut, the mostly true life story of a retired surgeon from 1C Productions.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Seitz, founder and president of 1C Productions, where thoughtful entertainment comes alive. Our content, like the show you're about to hear, sometimes includes mature themes and subject matter. This may be offensive to some listeners. It is only intended for mature audiences and has been categorized accordingly. While 1C does not present this material in salacious form, we do include it as the relevant and important story element that it is. I invite you to learn more about this show and other 1C content at just1c.com. That's JUSTONEC.com. And now it is my honor and joy to bring you Making the Cut.
When I was a toddler, I was ingrained with my older sister complex. She naturally bossed me about, and to please her, I usually did what she wanted. Since I hadn't grown up with her during my formative teenage years, I had not yet shed the hang-up of letting her boss me about.
Having spent my Christmas break studying instead of visiting Oma and Opa, I decided seeing family was absolutely necessary for Easter. I flew to visit Oma and Opa in Wedel, with plans to go to Hamburg to see my sister Gulnar and her husband Freimut, and my niece Tamara after. Arriving late at the British European Airway terminal at London Heathrow, I got upgraded to first class, a treat I attributed to wearing a suit and tie. On my first evening, Gulnar invited Ingrid, a colleague, to Good Friday dinner. They huddled together in the prolonged northern twilight with a single flickering candle, enveloped in the aroma of fresh coffee. I sat nearby, preoccupied with the puzzle of King Tut's death mask. The women's murmured conversation revolved around the fate of Ingrid's husband. Ingrid had received a telegram with news of her husband's sudden death. His body would arrive the next day on a Lufthansa flight. The cause of death of a healthy 30-something husband was unknown. He had developed a severe headache, rapidly lapsed into a coma, and died.
What do you think caused his death, Marwan?
I moved opposite the sad Ingrid. In the fading dusk, she looked older than my sister. I am only a first-year medical student. There is much yet for me to learn. However, from what I've learned thus far in neuroanatomy, I suspect the symptoms suggest a berry aneurysm, common in young males. It is a small outpouching of blood vessels in the brain that have the propensity to burst and bleed. The closed-spaced, bony skull allows no room for the leaking blood, causing a wicked headache, the rapid onset of coma, and death. Ingrid was not listening. She seemed far off.
I need to put Tamara to bed. Excuse me.
Freimut opened a bottle of wine, put on an LP of Buch's Hunting Violin Concert. Unaccustomed to alcohol, I sipped the wine slowly. Ingrid drank freely, nibbling on crackers with artichoke dip.
I just cannot believe he's gone. So quickly. With no warning.
I had no more information to give her. No more way to make her feel better.
There, she is asleep. Let's eat.
Finally, the lights were dimmed, candles lit, and dinner was served. Freimut opened a second bottle of wine. The conversation ranged along a spectrum of political topics, invariably reverting to the incomprehensible death of Ingrid's husband. Toward the end of dinner, she went to the bathroom. We exchanged glances in awkward silence. Gulnar rose. She knocked on the bathroom door.
Ingrid? Ingrid? Are you all right? Open the door.
Freimut and I cleared the table, extinguished the candles, and washed the dishes. Without conversation and music, the room fell eerily quiet. Gulnar joined us.
Ingrid is frightened to go home, to be alone. I told her she could stay.
The poor woman. To lose a husband so suddenly. My heart goes out to her.
Marwan, you will have to share the sofa bed with her.
Really? But she is a stranger, and the sofa is narrow. Don't you have a spare mattress? I don't mind sleeping on the floor. I don't know her.
She's very nice. It's only one night.
Years of my big sister getting her way had me sighing. Okay. We could manage if we lay head to feet. Gulnar and Freimut went to bed. I turned off the living room lights, slipped into my PJs, and crawled under the duvet. I maneuvered onto my left side, my back against the wall. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, Ingrid came toward me, wearing a pale, borrowed nightie. She slithered under the covers, lying on her back. A few millimeters separated us.
My feet smell terrible, so I'm lying this way around.
Her breath smelled of alcohol and toothpaste. Her body heat crept across the narrow divide. The prolonged silence reassured me. Thinking she had fallen asleep, I closed my eyes. It was going to be a difficult night.
Do you say a prayer at night?
No, my mother used to say it.
She did?
Yes, she'd say, "Thank God he's in bed."
Have you ever done an operation?
I wondered if dissecting Fred counted. She shifted slightly to her right, facing me.
Tell me about an operation you'd like to do.
An appendectomy.
Tell me about it. Please.
The appendix is like a worm with its base attached to the large bowel, forming a landmark on the skin known as McBurney's point. If you draw an imaginary line between the prominent hip bone and the belly button and trisect it, the outer spot near the hip bone is McBurney's point. That's usually the site of greatest tenderness in appendicitis. I paused. I could not hear her breathing. She lay motionless. "Are you asleep?" She nudged me with her ice-cold foot. I jumped.
No, of course not. What do you mean by whatever point?
Shall I show you?
Yes.
Shifting her weight onto her back once more, she hitched up her nightie and took my right hand and placed it in the middle of her tummy.
Okay, start again.
Her skin was warm and supple, her belly flat and smooth. It rose and fell with each breath. She had placed my hand with the tip of my little finger grazing her pubic hair. It felt coarse and rough, like steel wool. Using my index finger, I traced a line from her umbilicus to the anterior superior iliac spine of the pelvis. I trisected it and indicated McBurney's point, pressing firmly to emphasize the location.
Ouch! You're hurting me.
Sorry. Lifting my finger, I proceeded to make a horizontal skin incision with my fingernail, emphasizing the landmark.
Oh, I see.
Her breathing became irregular. I described a gridiron incision, whereby the surgeon bluntly splits the underlying 3 muscle layers in the direction of their muscle fibers, each layer running at 90 degrees to the next. I wondered how to demonstrate this. She suddenly threw back the duvet, swung her legs over the edge of the narrow bed, stood up, whipped off her nightgown, took off her ring, and slid back into bed. She was warm against me. I had never been seduced by an older woman. I also had, until her, never witnessed an all-encompassing, pulsating, and shuddering orgasm. It scared the hell out of me, and I thought she was having an epileptic fit at first. But this was also the first time that when I came, I lost all control, and a kaleidoscope of confused emotions rushed at me. I let them in. Rowing had done the difficult business of connecting me to my feelings again. Here, making love with a woman who is in agonizing pain over her husband's death, and yet willingly and wantonly entering with me into exquisite pleasure. A doorway of healing opened wide. She started the process of reversing my childhood programming, of disconnecting personal emotions from the pain of rejection. Being with her began pushing away the traumatic early memories of abandonment, worthlessness, anxiety, and shame. When I awoke, she was gone. I spent the day playing with my niece, exploring these newfound ideas about acceptance and worth. The next night, I took the suburban train to Wedel to spend the rest of my Easter break with Oma and Opa, enjoying their welcoming company and Oma's baked yummies. Before returning to London, Opa surprised me with a small Grundig transistor. I loved it. With it, I could listen to the BBC News and all the pop music on the hit parade charts. Music that would lift my spirits on breaks from my unending studies. Opa's present brought tears to my eyes, even though he pushed me away as I tried to hug him in gratitude. The Grundig went a long way to mollify me for his earlier years of tough love. However, their wonderful present created a very real problem. Should I declare it at the UK Customs after landing in London and pay a hefty import fee for electronic goods, or try to smuggle it into the country, hoping to evade detection? A young customs official pointed to my suitcase.
Anything to declare?
I got a birthday present while in Germany.
Open your suitcase.
I did as he commanded. On top of my clothes, lying in his direct view, was my precious token of Opa's affection, the Grundig radio. He picked it up, fingered it.
You'll have to pay import tax on this plus a fine, especially since you failed to declare it on the customs form.
Looking up, he paused and gazed at me.
Is that a Burnage Grammar School tie you're wearing?
Yes?
I went there. Must have been a few years before you. I've never met an old boy on this job.
He replaced my transistor radio, dropped the suitcase lid shut, checked off my declaration form, and winked at me.
Good luck.
Walking away, I felt that the branded F on my forehead, that had been there since the day I failed and had to repeat the lower sixth form, faded away. And with its fading, I began to like the feeling of being one of the boys by wearing the right school tie. The last weekend in May, I witnessed the exodus from Commonwealth Hall of students who had finished the term. They headed home for the summer, leaving the vast residence an eerily empty space, especially on a Saturday night. The handful of remaining inhabitants, graduates, overseas, and medical students, ate in the dining hall in the basement, surrounded by deserted tables, supporting upside-down chairs. We ate in silence, thinking of our studies, or longing for distant families. I had no family in England into whose folds I could creep. I decided to fly to Cairo in early September, having found an inexpensive Marriott travel package. I longed to reacquaint myself with the kin of my father, move into my old room, sleep in my bed, build model airplanes, perhaps go gliding. I would try once more to establish a meaningful rapport with Mother, for despite technically loving her, a buffer existed between us. I had difficulty getting close to her. She seemed to hesitate getting close to me, or letting me know she cared for me. She never baked me goodies or sewed on my buttons the way my Oma always did. It was as if a powerful electromagnetic shield prevented us from approaching each other. Mother had maintained our membership at the prestigious Gezira Jockey and Sporting Club in Zamalek. I looked forward to returning to that familiar place, where guests sat about the pool and patio in the shade of umbrellas, drinking and chatting convivially, waiters scurrying about with trays of mint tea held high. I could just see myself, sitting poolside, sunning myself at the very spot I met Magdalena. Perhaps she would materialize again. More importantly, I'd meet some of my old English school friends who lived and studied in Cairo. It would be a warm and relaxing change from my solitary studying in London. Like the old days, I'd resume my visits to my grandparents' flat in Sayyida Zainab, an Islamic district in Cairo, where two of my aunts remained after my grandfather died. Just dreaming of it, I could feel the warmth of their embrace, their kindness, love, and acceptance. I also yearned to visit my ancestral home of Beni Haram, and my Saidi family members, the dark-skinned Nubians of Upper Egypt. I wondered, after graduation, could I live in this village of adobe huts, clustered around a warren of compacted alluvial mud valleys, and become their surgeon and physician? Or would I be considered a Khawaja, a foreigner, a Westerner, thought of as a non-Muslim, not to be trusted, one who didn't belong? Excited, I put down a non-refundable down payment on the Marriott package and wrote to Mother, telling her of my Cairo plans. She eventually wrote me back to inform me that she would be elsewhere. Also, she had let out our flat to the American University for 3 years. I was stunned, furious. The one time I could visit, she'd be away. Exactly where, she did not say. And she'd let our place out for 3 years? What was she thinking? What had happened to my things? The books that I had read during my teenage years, my model airplane collection, my clothes and trinkets. For a moment, I thought she might surprise me and come to England. But of course, that did not happen. She had virtually disappeared without any explanation once again. And then I shook my head at my own resurfaced naivety. This was Mother. What should I have expected? The last shred of my howling need for her affection evaporated. Gone was the desire to reconcile with her. I resolved to make the trip anyway, totally dependent on myself. At the start of my pilgrimage home to Cairo, I took a train to Dover, crossed the Channel on the night ferry to Calais, went on to Amsterdam, then boarded a low-cost charter flight as part of the promotional deal. The old propeller plane, in the dawning era of commercial jets, made me wonder what other surprises this cost-saving deal had in store. The immigration officer, in his standard black uniform, stared at the photograph in my Egyptian passport. He opened a huge book and ran his finger down a list of names.
You are wanted as a deserter.
I am not a deserter. I was examined on Sunday, February 21st, 1960, in Heliopolis, north of Cairo. As the law says, an only son or the oldest son of a widow is issued final exemption status. I'm the head of my family, responsible for the care of my mother, an unmarried sister. I am an only son. My father, Wallah yarhamu, God bless his soul, is dead. Okay, I was lying about the sister part, but he did not need to know that. Despite my vehemence, the immigration officer did not flinch.
Where is your certificate?
In a bank safe in London. It's a precious document.
Well, you can't leave the country until you produce it.
I, a patriotic Egyptian, was accused of desertion and dereliction of duty? I was incensed. I cited my uncle's name, rank, and position in the army's general staff, knowing he was in Russia. I mentioned Mr. Mukhtar's name, the gentle individual working in the Bureaucrats, the state security service, who had helped me finally get a student passport. Eyeing me with suspicion, the immigration officer was unmoved. He dismissed me. I had barely set foot in Egypt, and once more, I was trapped in it. For the first week, I moved into the Marriott Zamalek, a formerly opulent royal palace. Staying in a 5-star hotel should have been an exhilarating experience, but the tension spoiled the joy. Seeking my family's help, I visited Uncle Saad. He had aged considerably in the 4 years since I'd seen him, and now teetered on the edge of frailty. He had retired from the position my father had obtained for him in the Ministry of Education. He claimed he had no connections anymore, no pull. My cousins looked on, observing my dismay without offering suggestions or any help. None of my other elderly uncles seemed able to assist. This stood in stark contrast to the help my father always gave willingly to these same family members. I was angry to the point of dismissing them from my life. I stated my resolution to clear up the accusation myself. They replied repeatedly, Inshallah, God willing. Hearing Inshallah induced acute anxiety. I understood the genesis of the phrase and its implication. It reflected a fundamental difference in the two cultures in which I had been raised. The foundation of Islam, the religion of Abraham, is submission. It is based on 5 pillars: faith in God and that Muhammad is his prophet, 5 daily prayers facing Mecca, annual obligatory charity and compassion to fellow man, fasting during the month of Ramadan to absolve one's sins, knowing right from wrong, and the once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage to Mecca. The contrast between my zebra stripes was clear. I considered the dark stripe as a passive state of mind. In the current Egyptian culture of insecurity, hopelessness, and limited upward mobility, invoking Inshallah is a matter of leaving it to God. My family felt comfortable with their expressed faith, Inshallah. My white stripe reflected an active state of mind, self-reliance, or, as the common saying is, God helps those that help themselves. My German Opa instilled this in me with his oft-repeated phrase, Selbst ist der Mann, do it yourself. The two expressions live simultaneously in my mind. I am a believer, and I have the faith. Yes, those who hold the faith can act and prevail with God's blessing. Thus, the outcome of my inquiry on how to get a duplicate copy of the military exemption document depended on me being proactive. My Egyptian family did not share this perspective. All Egyptian government departments were housed in the Mogamah, a monstrous 14-story bureaucratic edifice in Midan Tahrir. There, some 18,000 public servants toiled in offices in twisted and dead-end corridors. The Mukhabarat lay down the corridor I walked. I sought a Mr. Mukhtar, a police colonel who, out of kindness, had facilitated my getting a passport and exit visa 4 years earlier. I could not find his office. No one seemed to recognize his name, or wanted to acknowledge that they had even heard of him, or that he had ever existed. The situation felt surreal. I went on to the recruitment center at the end of the Cairo Metro line in Heliopolis. To my dismay, the sergeant who kept the attendance ledger eyed me with misgivings, despite my falling back to my Egyptian demeanor. He must have wondered if I was indeed an Egyptian, black stripe, an Ibn el-Balad, or white stripe, a Khawaga. I heard the fear of job security in his voice, as he claimed no record of my earlier visit existed. Let me see the log. I saw the scribe write my name.
Bukra.
Come back tomorrow. The classical and characteristically Egyptian move to avoid dealing with difficult issues by procrastinating. The hope was that the inquirer would abandon the effort, not bother them further. Bureaucrats, even those in the army, had the reputation of being corrupt, incompetent, indifferent, and complacent. I returned the next morning. And the next. And the next. And the next. On my fourth appearance, when the sergeant and I were briefly alone, I slipped him a £20 note, equivalent to $120, and he finally let me see the ledger. It was an old British leather-bound book, long and heavy, the pages crisscrossed with rows and columns, filled in Arabic with all the conscript's information. Look, there, on the third row down. It's my name.
Yes.
And there is the date of my examination, exactly as I said.
Yes. Now look here.
He pointed out the date of birth, written in the next column.
It is not your date of birth.
I examined the ledger more carefully. Yes, the scribe has transposed the dates in the two columns. Such errors frequently occurred in all fields of bureaucracy, because the education of the average scribe, perhaps a peasant, was only at the 4th grade level. Look, if the date of my examination were the date of my birth, I would have been 1 day old. That is obviously a mistake.
The army does not make mistakes.
But clearly, it does. Another certificate must be issued here.
Bukra.
I swore quietly to myself. I appeared again the next day at around 10 a.m. This time, the sergeant wordlessly ushered me into a narrow room that resembled an old barrack. Why had his demeanor changed? Five army officers in khaki uniforms sat on a raised platform behind a long table covered in green felt. 2 majors and 2 lieutenants flanked an elderly colonel in the middle. Giant photos of President Gamal Abdel Nasser and Air Marshal Abdel Hakim Amer in their military attire stared down at me. I was facing a military tribunal. My heart sank. I knew the rising tensions with Israel meant the military wanted to conscribe every eligible male, particularly educated males. I was only 20 and scared stiff, but I was determined to keep my wits about me. Without introduction, the colonel addressed me, ordering me to step forward. The sergeant stood a few paces behind me, to my left. I was surrounded, and in some serious trouble. Why had the ante been raised? I answered the same questions I had been asked at the airport. The grilling seemed endless. Only the colonel spoke, haranguing me. His tone fluctuated between benevolent, fatherly understanding and harsh authoritarian, with veiled threats for not having such an important document as the final exemption status on me. His fellow officers looked on, entertained by the colonel's show of power. This felt like a circus performance, only with more consequences. My uncle, a colonel on the general staff, went unmentioned. When I tried to introduce his name into the conversation, I was ignored. The finger jabbing in the air, directed at me, went on and on. All the while, the colonel glared down at me from his elevated perch. My eyes were riveted to his. When he glanced down at some papers, I caught a glimpse of an old station clock above their heads. Soon it would be time for the Zohr, noon prayers. Surely he would stop. At long last, the colonel came to the real issue at hand.
Did you bribe the sergeant? Don't you know bribes are punishable in the army?
One of the junior officers cleared his throat and gently interrupted, saying that I was not in the military. Ignoring the comment and without skipping a beat, the colonel continued his tirade, stating that this was modern Egypt. Bribes were forbidden. Had the colonel somehow erroneously surmised that I was part of the old pre-revolution British colonial establishment? Probably the son of wealthy landowners? Or a foreigner that had evaded eviction after Britain's global embarrassment by the failed Suez War? Could he not see that I was a true Egyptian, even if I was attending an English university? Through my veins flowed Upper Egyptian Saidi blood. Did he not see that I was an Ibn el-Balad, a native son? In his eyes, I was not one of his Egyptian tribe. He did not know how Egyptian I felt when I was in Manchester. He had no idea how I had borne the insults and endured the pain of being one of his tribe when I was in England. The fear that had put me on the knife edge now gripped me further. I stood silenced and frozen. Either I had given the sergeant an insufficiently substantial bakshish, or someone had seen him accept it and reported it. More than likely, I had simply bribed the wrong person. Jabbing his finger in my direction again, the colonel repeated his statement that in modern Egypt, bribes were forbidden. It was a present for his children. I swear in Allah's name. I was dismissed. The frosty sergeant, avoiding eye contact, issued me another final exemption status certificate. I could have kicked him. Acquiring the document had consumed 1 week of my precious 3-week study interlude. I stapled that damned certificate into the back of my Egyptian passport, against all bureaucratic rules of defaming government documents. Tough luck.
After these events, I doubted I'd ever return to Egypt. Mother depriving me of a home during my visit was one thing, but the social environment where I'd live was in a constant state of chaos under an autocratic regime fearful of its citizens and inflamed with their fantasies of greatness. I began to reevaluate my cultural identity and ties. As I had for my entire life, I wondered where I truly belonged.
You've been listening to Making the Cut from 1C Productions. Making the Cut was written, produced, and directed by Rebecca Seitz, based on Michael McGead's manuscript, Mastering the Knife. Noah James played Michael McGead. Other roles were brought to life by the voice talent of Liz Fodor, Frederica Solak, and Ahmed Al-Janaid. Audio engineering provided by Zisher LLC. Making the Cut theme music by Kyle J. Baker. Learn more at makingthecutpodcast.com.